And we will get underway. Fran, do you want to start out?
Yeah. Welcome to the Larimer League discussion group. The purpose of this group is to bring the issues of the league to a local level. The league, as most of you know, is nonpartisan. We don't deal with politicians, pro or con. On the other hand, we are very, very strong on many, many policy issues about a whole range of subjects that are aimed to increase and protect our democracy and our safety. Environmental issues, voting issues, housing issues, environmental issues. And today we will have a presentation that is consistent with those values. Kathy Mayer has arranged this, brought our speaker, and she will introduce our speaker and take it from there.
Hey, thanks, Fran. And hello, and thanks all of you very much for joining us tonight. I'm Kathy Marr, member of the South Larimer Discussion Group of the League of Women Voters of Larimer County. And as Fran was saying, we hold monthly presentations and discussions on matters of interest or concern to residents of the southern part of Larimer County. Tonight we're talking about wildfire and practical steps we all can take to protect our homes and property. And I don't know if anybody else is aware, but I kind of stumbled on information recently that May is Wildfire Awareness Month. So how timely is this? We'll be pausing for questions at certain points during the presentation. And at that point, you can either raise your Zoom hand to be recognized or put your question in the chat, and we'll tackle that. We are recording tonight's presentation, so we'll have the video posted within a few days. We're going to send the link to the video to all the participants, and please feel free to share that with friends and family who might be interested in this topic. So we're going to get right to it. Our speaker tonight is Kevin Lyles, a certified wildfire mitigation specialist who does defensible space assessing and educating the public on protecting their homes and property from wildfire. So Kevin's going to give us a presentation tonight covering fire behavior, defensible space, Firewise plants, if you weren't aware that they do exist, home and structure hardening, and maintenance. Kevin's a professional landscape architect with over 25 years of experience designing open space, parks, trails, and native landscapes. In 2023, he started Horsetooth Nursery, a small nursery offering native, waterwise, and firewise plants at his home in the foothills near Horsetooth Reservoir. And that's a really cool little nursery. You should check it out. So go ahead, Kevin.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it will still work. Okay, is the screen showing correctly?
Looks good to me.
Okay. Well, thanks for the great introduction. As Kathy said, I'm a landscape architect and wildfire mitigation specialist. I have a consulting landscape architecture practice, and then I do also some fire mitigation assessments on the side. We do that under a separate trade name of Firewise Design. I do have some information on the screen. This will come up again at the end if you do want to check my information. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. We're going to start with the big picture and then zero in, starting with social and landscape context. We'll take a break, answer a few questions. Basically, between each of these subjects, these topics, we'll take a quick break and answer any questions that come up in the chat. I ask that you save those questions until these breaks. If we can get through those intermissions, if you will, within like 3 minutes or so, that should leave us about half an hour at the end for a good open discussion. After fire behavior, we'll talk about defensible space, Firewise plants, both the characteristics and examples that you could use in your home landscape. We'll talk about home hardening, making it more fire resistant, and also talk about maintenance. I do have some slides at the ends with some web links, etc. I can leave those up on the screen while we're chatting, and they'll also be available with the recording. So starting with the big picture situation, it is somewhat precarious. We have over a century of fire suppression policy that has resulted in a landscape that has an unnaturally large amount of fuel. And we have observed over the last century increasing frequency and severity of drought, especially here in the Southwest. Concurrent with that, we do have more development occurring in fire-prone areas. And this is in large part, I believe, due to the housing affordability crisis. Unfortunately, folks that are moving into these areas are often not aware of fire risk and also not aware what they can do to mitigate that risk. So that's what we hope to cover today, at least at a high level. The mega fires that we've seen here in our state and also across the country has started to upend the insurance industry. People are experiencing non-renewals. Some insurers are just redlining whole areas that they won't issue policies within. In other cases, they are choosing to not renew unless mitigation efforts are executed and documented. And it sounds like that is happening here along the Front Range. I've heard anecdotal stories of that occurring. The state has responded in 2020, I think it was in 23. They established the Fair Access to Insurance Requirements Plan. This is kind of a backstop plan that is available in a lot of states. If you find that insurers won't cover you commercially, and you can document that to the state, this plan is now live as of this spring, and you can apply and get coverage through the state. It is very bare bones. It is not the equivalent of traditional home insurance. And because the pool is self-funded by the high-risk properties in the plan, it is assumed that pricing will be higher than it has been in the past. So we're going to talk about Firewise xeriscaping today. This is xeriscape is probably a term you're already familiar with. It is an approach to gardening and landscaping that reduces the use of supplemental watering. It has been given the name xeriscaping because of poor implementation, like you see in the upper right photo. This is not what we're talking about. We don't want to see large seas of bare rock. But at the same time, it's not sustainable to do traditional landscaping like we see in the lower right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I define Firewise xeriscaping as green, low water landscaping that is aesthetically attractive. It performs ecological functions. It is more like the photo you see on the left, that this strategic approach to landscaping reduces the fire intensity and the rate of spread in that vicinity of your home or commercial landscape. Now, it's important to note that irrigation is a tool that is appropriate for Firewise landscapes. Plants that are healthy and well hydrated, not drought stressed, are more resistant to ignition. And when we incorporate functional turf areas, that can, if they are irrigated, they can mown, that they also function as a fire break. So irrigation is an important tool that's still at our disposal. We must remember that the Front Range here is a semi-arid landscape that was once dominated by shortgrass, midgrass prairie predominantly. And the only way that we have this kind of urban forest that you see on the right is because of largely due to imported water from the western slope, not relying locally on surface groundwater. I think most of the public is aware that the mountains burn, the forests burn. It certainly gets a lot of media attention. I think it's a lot less common that large grassland fires make the national news, but of course they do burn, and prairies burned more regularly than the forests did. With the growing population, there will be increasing pressure that water is reserved for domestic purposes and not landscape purposes. That trend will probably continue, and we need to keep that in mind as we are converting our landscapes to xeriscapes, that they're also Firewise, so we don't create a new problem. I'm sorry about that. I didn't remember to display that. Obviously, both the mountains and the plains burn, and urban areas will burn. And we should remember that urban landscapes have fuel that includes our structures, unfortunately. So let's talk about the wildland-urban interface. Most of us live in or near the wildland-urban interface, what we call the WUI. I think it's usually associated with forest lands up in the mountains, but it does include the plains. Anywhere that you have wild vegetation that meets or intermingles with human habitation, that is that interface. And so this map that was generated on the state's wildfire risk viewer shows the density of housing in the wildland-urban interface. The darker the color, the more dense the homes are, starting with the gray and light blue is the lightest density, and then when you get to the dark purple, that is the greatest density. As you can see, there's actually more homes on the plains in the WUI than there actually is in the mountains. So this is zooming in the southeast part of our county, looking at Fort Collins, Loveland, Berthoud. You can see that intermixing. Now the city, the core of the cities are not considered in the wildland-urban interface because they're fully urban. But we should keep in mind that that perimeter can, if we have an event like Marshall Fire, if there is ignition of homes on a perimeter, it can travel any way the winds blow. So it is important for all of us to be thinking about this, even if you live in our cities, especially with our open spaces. There's definitely a lot of fuel that's available in different forms. So I think the earliest that I can recall of these kind of devastating wildfires here in this state were the Waldo Canyon Black Forest fires of 2012 and 2013. But we've had several since then, including the Camarillo Peak fire and the East Troublesome fires here in Larimer County. The Marshall fire was more recent in 2021. That was obviously a more urban, devastating fire. And of course, this past January, we saw just an enormous tragedy with multiple fires in Southern California that affected something like 10,000 homes and businesses. It's important to note that extreme winds and drought caused those fires to just explode very quickly and become uncontrollable. But the way that we develop our communities, the way we install and maintain our landscapes, made it easier for those fires to travel, to ignite, and to travel in our urban areas. The state also recently established a wildfire resiliency code board. I haven't seen much media coverage of this. It is currently going through a final draft. Currently, it will be implemented this summer. This is going to establish a statewide minimum code for fire safety and property protection. It will be implemented through a lot of local jurisdictions. But this is something to be aware of. If you're interested, the website's on the screen. There is a concurrent map that's being formulated. Basically, the idea is that the fire risk is highly variable based on location, topography, fuels, etc. So they're developing a map that would assign a class that would apply to that area, and that particular class would define what code requirements would apply to that property. Before we go into fire behavior, are there any questions about that kind of landscape context and social context before we move into fire behavior?
I have a question. Have HOAs been aware of this new law and effort?
I'm not sure. I suspect there are a lot of HOAs that probably have no idea this is happening. I think generally speaking, the HOAs wouldn't be involved in implementation of the code. It would apply to new development as well as like remodels that trigger certain things, like a certain increase in the, an enlargement of a home, or a certain amount of the home that gets re-sided. Things of that would trigger it, and it would be kind of implemented through like the building departments. But the fire departments also have a role in that. I'm not that well versed in how the implementation is going to happen, but I have been surprised at how little coverage there's been in the media about it. So yes, I think it will be a surprise to a lot of folks.
So if you're, say, going to build a deck on your house, you might run into this new requirements for that sort of thing.
Yes. Once this is implemented, it will take a little bit of time to trickle down through the local jurisdictions. But there is a requirement that local jurisdictions meet or exceed those minimum standards. And that will apply to things like decks and siding and all that kind of stuff, including fencing too. Okay, well, let's move on to fire behavior then. So fire is obviously just a chain reaction. It's a rapid oxidation.
We lost your slideshow, Kevin.
Oh, okay. Let me try resharing here. Is it back?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I tried to advance the slide and it seemed to change tabs on me. Okay. So fire is just a chain reaction, a rapid oxidation of a fuel. It requires three things, what we call the fire triangle: a fuel, the presence of oxygen, and the presence of heat. On the landscape scale, we really can't feasibly modify fuel and oxygen. Oxygen and heat, but we can modify fuel, and we can do so before a fire ignites. So we will be talking about how to break that chain. So fire is spread by three methods: direct flame contact, which is pretty self-evident, embers, which blow in the wind, and radiant heat. So embers are actually the leading cause of home losses from wildfire. I think that message is getting out. This is a primary concern when we're talking about fire mitigation. We want to really think about how we protect from embers. Embers, also called like firebrands. It's just burning chunks of vegetation, debris, and it gets either blown by the wind, or it can be brought aloft by convection currents. The embers can land a mile or more ahead of the actual flame front of the fire. And as we saw with like the Cameron Peak fire, the area that burned north of Masonville, that actually was a spot fire that started like I think more than a mile ahead of the main fire front at that time. So think of like a blizzard. Instead of snowflakes, you have little chunks of burning debris. They kind of travel like snowflakes. They drift, they blow. That's kind of what we're dealing with. Direct contact from flames is the second leading cause of home losses from fire. Direct flames will basically heat and dry out combustible material until it ignites, depending on their exposure. And if those fuels are continuous from the landscape to the home, you can have home ignition directly from the landscape. A third method is that radiant heat that we mentioned. You can have ignition just from the radiant heat. You know, that is the heat that you experience when you're sitting in front of a campfire. You're largely not experience warmth from the convection, though that is part of it. You're largely feeling that radiant heat in the infrared spectrum. It also can heat and dry out materials until they spontaneously combust, even if there's no exposure to flame. And this radiant heat is what we're thinking about when we're talking about locations of firewood piles, propane tanks, sheds. We want those to be 30 feet or greater away from a home because there's so much energy from those sources that they are a risk from radiant ignition. Let's see if I can get this to play. So this is a demonstration by CAL FIRE. This video is available on YouTube. It shows how simple landscape modifications can affect the risk of ignition to the structure, be it a shed or a home. You saw that they use drip torches. That's basically simulating embers that will ignite your wood mulch. The building on the left has wood mulch up to the home. It has a wood fence. So we have direct contact between burning material and your structure. It's important to note that the structure on the right had a metal fence attached to the structure, and it had a 5-foot zone of hardscape, which we'll see in just a second here. And that created this break in that chain of fuel, so it couldn't reach the structure. Fans kind of just were the purposes of keeping the video clear. But you know, in a storm event, you can have winds that are. Let's see if I can advance my slide here. Winds can be 50 to 100 miles an hour. So that's important when we're thinking about home hardening. No matter what you do to your landscape, if you have embers blowing at 50 to 100 miles an hour, you really have to do work on the structure itself too. And we'll talk about that. So that's the end of the section on fire behavior. There's actually quite a bit more we could talk about. But for the purpose of this discussion, I thought I would just raise those key principles that apply to defensible space, which we'll talk about next, as well as home hardening. Does anyone have any questions related to fire behavior? If not, I'm free to proceed with defensible space. Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
So let's see. Are we still sharing correctly?
Yes, it's good.
Okay. So something to keep in mind, if the home itself is properly constructed and maintained, the landscape within 100 feet of that structure will largely determine whether or not there's a risk of ignition of the home itself. I have seen these really cool videos, I think on YouTube, where they did these experiments in these forest plots where they would set up kind of like this illustration here. They would place a shed like 100 feet away from this block of forest. They would ignite the forest and get like a really intense fire, and then they would put sensors in the structure to see how hot it would get. And once you exceeded 100 feet, even with like a crown fire, the wood structure wouldn't ignite. So this is the area that we're really talking about, that 100 feet. It is actually broken up into 3 different zones. We start at the base of the structure. The immediate zone, or zone 1, extends from the foundation out 5 feet. And in that zone, we really don't want to have any combustible materials at all. And that's often not feasible. So things like wood decks, if they are attached, what we do is we extend that zone 5 feet from the perimeter of the deck. But we'll talk about decks later. Zone 2 goes from that 5-foot limit to the 30-foot, which is represented in orange. And zone 3 goes from that orange more to that yellow color, which is the 100-foot zone. These illustrations are from the State Forest publication. It's available on their website. I do have a link in the slides at the end if you want to look for that. So let's talk a little bit about zone 1. This is our top priority. If you're just starting out, you want to know where to start in that first zone, 0 to 5 feet. Ideally, there would be no wood decks and no wood fences and no vegetation within that 5 feet. And this includes wood mulch. As we saw in that video, wood mulch can transmit flame directly to a structure like a deck. This is an illustration of Zone 1 at the Idaho Firewise demonstration garden. It's a fabulous demonstration garden. They have a wonderful website, which we can talk about later. We're looking at this little stucco building here. You can see that there are no trees overhanging it. There are no junipers nearby. There is, however, some vegetation within that first 5 feet. This plant material is very strategically selected, and we'll talk about that when we get into plant materials. So moving out to zone 2 and zone 2 from 5 to 30 feet, trees and shrubs are certainly desirable, acceptable in this zone. What we're trying to do is cluster them, space them in a way that there's a discontinuity in fuels. And this is not only a horizontal spatial distribution, it's also vertical. The flame from a fuel source, if you have like a 2-foot shrub, the flames can be 3 times the height of the fuel. So a 2-foot shrub can have 6-foot flames on top of it. So in this scenario, you see this little cross section here. There are no, the tree is limbed up, but there's also no shrubs underneath it because those shrubs can act like ladder fuel that can bring the flames into the crown of the tree. Now there is some math involved in how you space these clusters of trees and shrubs out. I can share with you some documents that help guide you through that process. The important thing is that as a fire approaches a home, we're trying to moderate it and get that fire down to the ground surface, which is much easier to fight than anything in the canopies. This is an illustration of zone 2 at that demonstration garden. We're looking outwards from the shed. You can see greater, more plant material, more continuity of plant material, but it's still broken up. In this case, there are gravel paths that act as fuel breaks. In a home landscape, this might be where you have a functional turf that's irrigated. That serves as a fire break. There is, in this case, no wood mulch, though as you move out into the landscape, wood mulch is more accepted. And we'll talk about that in zone 3. So zone 3, we're moving out farther into that 30 to 100 foot zone. You can see that there's a greater number and tighter spacing of trees and shrubs. What we're trying to do here is just moderate the intensity of wildfire. If you live in an area that has a canopy, whether that's an urban forest or conifer forest, this is the zone in which you want to manage the vegetation in a way that moderates the fire and gets it down to the ground plane, just reducing the intensity. That's the intention of this zone. Now, obviously, in an urban setting, 100 feet may be one or more lots away from your home in an urban setting. This is where it's important to kind of work together, collaborate with neighbors, and kind of strategically look at it as a community. And this is definitely where HOAs could play a very large role, as well as cities managing that urban landscape. So this is just, again, the demonstration garden. We're looking out. You obviously see more shrubs and trees, tighter spacing. The further out you go, the denser the plant material is. We still ideally want to see this pretty lean and green, not a lot of dead wood, not a lot of leaves and debris, because those obviously travel in a windstorm and can take flame towards the home. But this is the zone where if you do want some wildness, if you do want some habitat, zone 3 is definitely the ideal place for that. If you do want like brush piles and that sort of thing, leaf litter, you just want to be thoughtful about its placement. You're not putting that under trees where it can serve as a ladder to get the flame back into the canopy. So that's the conclusion, the introduction of defensible space and the 3 zones. Before we talk about plant materials, are there any questions?
Andrea Longo had a question.
Let's see. Is recycled asphalt considered combustible for zone 1? I have not heard. Obviously, asphalt millings do have some tar, some asphaltic binder in it. I've never heard that considered to be a combustible material. In a major fire event with prolonged flame, there might be some off-gassing that combusts, but it's not a material that's going to transmit flame across that zone. So I personally would consider that to be a proper fire break.
So it sounds like it's in the same order of my Class A deck.
Was that Fran?
No, that's Andrea.
Oh, Andrea. Did you say you have a Class A deck?
I have a steel frame deck with composite decking.
Good for you.
But we're gonna talk about decks in a little bit. But...
Yes, we will. I built my deck the same way. That is absolutely fabulous. Now there is some discussion about composite decks that we can talk about later. It's generally considered a pretty safe material because it mostly just sags and it doesn't actively transmit flame.
San Diego County said this material was okay, so I figured it'd be okay for Colorado.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've seen pictures after the Black Forest fire where the homes were gone, but these composite Trex type decks were still standing. They were all droopy and, not salvageable, but they didn't contribute to the fire whatsoever. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Well, let's talk about the green stuff, the stuff that I get excited about. I I am going to share some slides from Idaho Firewise. It's a fabulous website. I did get their permission to use some of their imagery. You can find a great plant list on their website. There's also a great plant list in this fact sheet on the left side of your screen. It's called Fact Sheet 6.305. It talks about defensible space zones, but there's a great plant list in there as well. You can do a word search for it online, but there's also a link that I can share in the slides. So when we talk about Firewise plants, it's important to keep in mind that this is not a binary thing. All plants will burn. But there's a huge spectrum between plants that are highly inappropriate in a Firewise landscape, and there are plants that are highly appropriate. And this is based on 5 criteria that you see on your screen. We're looking for plants that have a high moisture content, plants that have soap or latex or pectin content, which just kind of moderates the process of combustion. Plants that are drought tolerant, so they just don't get stressed and lose all that moisture in their foliage. We're looking for plants that are low or compact growing, so there's just physically less material. And definitely plants that have little or no oils or resin content, because those are highly combustible. So we'll start. Yep, that's that same list. So we'll start with plants that are high in moisture content. As I said, these would burn, but evaporating the water content out of the plant tissue requires a lot of energy. And so when these plants are exposed to that heat, they don't readily combust. They'll evaporate a lot of moisture, but they just don't transmit. They don't spread flame. So examples of plants with high moisture content are things like prickly pears, ice plants, sedums, or what you call stone crops, hens and chicks, etc. These are the plants that actually were on the roof and around the perimeter of that little demonstration shed. So these would be the kinds of things that would be kind of the exception to the rule in that zone 1. And my understanding is the code, the state code, it sounds like they are thinking of having a plant list of things like these that would be permitted in that zone 1. So let me go on to plants that have saponin or soap content. Some of these plants have soap in their name for that reason. These include perennials such as dianthus or the cheddar pinks, that sort of thing, soapworts, which are the pinker flowers in the screen, and shrubs like our native soapweed yucca. I know that's not actually a soapweed yucca, and mock orange. So these are good choices. We're pretty much considering this suitable for zone 2. As are these other plants. Other plants have latex as a defense mechanism primarily. These also are resistant to combustion. These are things like your milkweeds and spurges, bluebells and poppies. They tend to be deer and rabbit resistant because of the latex. But unlike some of those aromatic perennials and shrubs that use a different defense mechanism, these typically don't have much scent if you are crushing the leaves or stems. Plants with high pectin content include shrubs like our native snowberries, hawthorns, ornamental roses, and crab apples, and grapevines even. We have to be thoughtful about our placement of grapevines, but they would be included in that category. And there's a very large category of plants that have the attribute of being either low growing compact growing, just less fuel available and lower to the ground. And we do have some good native cultivars that fit in this category, such as the Regent Serviceberry, Pawnee Buttes Sand Cherry, and Autumn Amber Sumac. So if you want to use some natives, think about using these cultivars that are either smaller in size or lower to the ground. This may be a little counterintuitive, but using green ground covers actually is considered Firewise. These plant materials compete with your, with bare ground. You often will have a lot of problems with annual weeds, in particular annual weeds like cheatgrass and some of the thistles, etc. They tend to, go through their life cycle, cure out, and become a fuel source during the fire season. So by using ground covers that are Firewise, that have moisture, they compete with that kind of vegetation, but they also are a good substitute for wood mulch. These are actually desirable over wood mulch because wood mulch can smolder and sustain a fire for a long period of time, where these don't do that. So examples: seafoam sage, hummingbird, trumpet mitt, which is that the first and the second on the left. We have the desert or Colorado 4 o'clock on the right, the purpley flowers, and partridge feather, the one in the lower right. Even some strawberries are considered good for this use. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to avoid plants that have high oil or resin content. And we're very fortunate that there's a lot of great native plants that offer a lot of color and texture, visual interest, habitat, sustain our pollinators and hummingbirds. These include our fleabanes and buckwheats, blue flax, the globe mallows, pussy toes. So a great diversity of plants that are suitable for the Firewise landscape. Now, during the, a lot of these native plants, a lot of our ornamental plants tend to be more of a warm season species that may be slow to wake up in the spring. We can use spring flowering bulbs to add interest during those periods. Also help sustain our native pollinators too. So that is another thing you can consider on that ground plane. So before we go into home hardening and decks, etc., any questions about plant materials?
I'll just comment that I was really happy to see some of my favorite native plants in there. Hurrah!
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think a good rule of thumb is if you take some leaves and you crush them and rub them in your hands, you may not want to do that with some species that have latex, etc. But if they don't have that kind of really distinct smell, then they're probably suitable. So some things like Russian sage. If you have worked with Russian sage, it has a very distinct odor that has high VOCs. It is considered a xeric plant that's suitable for xeriscapes, but is not suitable. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. It needs to be used with caution and not used anywhere that it can, ignite some shrubs nearby, or you don't want to put it next to your deck. Okay, well, feel free. There's some great plant lists that I can try to point you to. If you're so inclined to do some landscaping, there's some great resources that are very suitable to our location. So let's talk about home hardening. We're going to start with deck materials. So it's important to keep in mind that smart landscaping in and of itself doesn't eliminate the threat from wildfire. Because we know that the primary means of ignition statistically is from embers. But we can do quite a bit to make our decks and fences, etc., Firewise. Starting with decks, we do have some imagery from some suppliers that I received permission to use. These aren't endorsements, but I think they're good to inspire you. And if you are interested in any of these products, I do have some links on the last slides. So decks are a common bridge to take a wildfire from the landscape to a home. It is often the first thing that might ignite, assuming that the home is properly constructed and maintained, and there's not leaves in the gutters, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of times the wood deck will be the first thing to go. They can be made of non-combustible materials. We talked already about composite plastics, which are considered ignition resistant. These are pictures of actual reinforced concrete planks that are textured and stained to look like wood. I actually have a couple samples of it. It can be used like traditional decking, but you can actually because they're reinforced, you can actually increase the span between your joists, etc. So it's a pretty cool product. There's actually a concrete tile that's made to be, it can be used in retrofit applications. It's designed to span the 16-inch on center standard for wood decks. You, of course, can use it for new construction as well. So this is an option. It can even be used kind of in tandem, where you could use, either that concrete plank or these stone tile or the concrete tiles adjacent to the structure, and then transition to wood or another material as you move out away from the walls. We can also make our framing non-combustible. Not just the framing, but even the railings using steel or glass or cables. We can basically make the entire deck structure ignition resistant. I really like steel framing. It has many benefits beyond just ignition resistance. It is obviously much lighter in weight. What I really like is it's straight and true. It doesn't warp. It doesn't shrink. Like all the frustrations we have with our lumber these days. And it's pretty much maintenance free. The image on the left is of a product called Evolution. It's a modular system. It's kind of like pre-designed. There's span tables, etc. So it makes design easy. It comes powder coated. So if it is a second story deck, you've got that nice finish to it. But you don't have to use an expensive product like that. The photos on the right are of a deck that I constructed, I think 2019. These are just commercial steel studs used for commercial construction. The nice thing is they come pre-punched for utility raceways, so you can easily run gas pipe to a propane grill or lights, etc. You can run through those little punched out holes. It's a much cheaper solution. It's actually very cost competitive. There is a learning curve to building with it. But you can even order it. I just purchased it at the local drywall supply company. The important thing is that you have to specify a heavier galvanizing finish because it obviously has more weather exposure. But even if we don't use those alternative products, we can make our wood decks more fire resistant. One method you can use is to increase the spacing between your deck boards. Embers can get caught between the deck boards. We want those to just drop through and fall to the ground, assuming that there's no combustibles below the deck, which is important. We can wrap the top of the joists with metal flashing, or there's like a foil tape that you can use. This protects those joists from those embers. Additionally, it's good practice to wrap the top of the joists anyways, because that's an area that often will rot from the moisture exposure. So that's good practice. Lastly, it is good practice. Well, I think it's required that you properly flash over your ledger board, which is where it traditionally connects to the home. But we want to actually extend that up above the surface of the deck. Ideally, we want a minimum of 6 inches of flashing exposed above the deck. This is the zone where we have a lot of accumulated leaf litter, pine needles, all kinds of things will collect. Additionally, this is an area that embers will collect. So we want to make this as free of any combustible material on the face of the wall, a minimum of 6 inches. Wood fences are a major vector if they are connected to the homes. A lot of residential developments have those wood privacy fences. We definitely want to transition to less combustible materials, especially in the 5 feet. But there are some cool products. There are concrete products that look like split rail, or that look like privacy fences, pre-stressed concrete. There's also all kinds of metal products that either look like wood or intentionally don't look like wood. But there's other options too, like gabions, which are these metal cages that you fill with rock that can provide screening. You can even do rammed earth walls, like you see this little pilot project on the left. There's all kinds of creative products we can use to kind of break that chain. Wood fences are kind of considered to be fuses that are connected to your house. We need to break that so there's not a fuse connecting to the house. We do want to keep debris and embers from collecting under our decks. That picture in the upper right is under a neighbor's home. We have leaf litter, we have cardboard boxes, and we have bins full of woodworking cutoffs. Lots of fuel that is easily ignited. We want to get that out from under our decks. We want to screen them. The important thing is that you use a mesh that's 1/8 inch or less, and that it's either galvanized or stainless steel. And there's a great stainless steel product that I have a link for. And this is also appropriate, actually necessary for our gable vents, our soffit vents on the house. Those need to be protected from embers because that's a primary way of ember intrusion into a home. Lastly, we can treat our wood decks and fences to be more ignition resistant. Obviously, if you have rotted wood, actually ignites very easily, so we want to replace those. But if you have a wood fence or deck and you've got cracks in it, you can caulk those so there's no place for embers to lodge. And then most importantly, we can actually treat the surface. There are fire retardants that you can add to oil-based or water-based stains. You mix it into your stain of choice, you apply it to the surface, and it actually upgrades the rating of that surface to Class A for the duration of time that surface remains. So you just maintain your fence, keep it, protected from water intrusion, and it also will uh, resist ignition as well. Before we move on to our last section, maintenance, any thoughts or questions about home hardening?
Kevin, I wanted to ask you about you said that one product was rammed earth, that Kenton Seth product. Could you describe that a little more? That's really interesting.
Yeah, I don't have any personal experience with it, but it is a method of home construction and it's considered a very low impact, sustainable method of construction where you use the native soils. And I think there's different approaches, but typically they will add like Portland cement or other binders that you obviously form it up as if you were like forming like you would build a concrete form for a wall. But instead you're mixing this soil with whatever the additive is, and then you place it in the form in lifts, and each lift, which might be only a couple inches tall, you compact either manually or mechanically, and you just keep doing that until you get to the top of your wall. It's supposed to be a great method of construction that is very low impact, very sustainable. I don't have any personal experience with it, but it's also supposed to be very good for like solar, moderating solar temperatures. If you have a large thermal mass in your walls, it is used both for home construction, and Kenton is experimenting with it both as an exterior screen wall, but he's also done it on an interior wall in his house.
Thank you. Kathy Smith has a question.
Hi, thank you, Kevin. I was wondering where you find the deck guard that you were just talking about.
If you do a search online, it does come up. I do have a website that I can show you the link when we get to the end. I will warn you, it is an expensive product. I think it's like a quart size or maybe a pint size, and you mix it with a gallon of your stain. And that one little bottle is like, if you just buy it by the small bottles, it's like $50. So it's suitable for a small fence or for a deck, a small deck. I believe that they do sell it in larger pails, but I don't know. I think you need to get a quote directly from them. I don't know that you can buy it off their website.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. There are other, I didn't mention that there are other fire retardants that dry like clear, that you can, instead of mixing it with your stain or paint, you can spray it on the surface after the surface finished. But the challenge there is you don't know how long it will weather off. And unlike mixing it with a stain, you don't know when that protection fades away because it's not mixed with the stain. But that's another option that I think is actually probably cheaper. And I do have some links at the end for a couple products of that nature. Okay, any other questions before I move on to maintenance? If not, we'll proceed. I saved the best for last. I know everyone gets really excited about landscape maintenance and housekeeping, but it does make a big difference. Even if you design and install this, theoretically perfect Firewise landscape, the protection is only good as the weakest link. And if you don't maintain the vegetation, the accumulation of debris, or just stuff that accumulates around the home, that becomes your weak link, and a lot of that work becomes moot at that point. So it's important to talk about. There's nothing earth-shattering here. We're talking about just removing weeds, maintaining plant health, trying to keep the clutter to a minimum around the perimeter of the home or shed, deadheading perennials, maintaining the irrigation system so it's functioning properly if you do have one, not trying to boost vegetative growth with fertilizers. You might need to do that with your turf grass. And then it's good to think about doing this kind of very comprehensively, just doing like a walk around your home, doing that in late summer where the weather's still good. You have time to get things cleaned up before winter arrives. Obviously, some things like leaf collection, if you need to do that, you just have to wait until the leaves drop. The nice thing is that you probably have the tools. If you are a homeowner, you probably have the tools and skills already to do a lot of these things. And if you don't, any landscape contractor would be familiar with these practices. We just need to think about them in the context of fire. That we want to keep things lean and green. We might need to do some strategic tree or shrub removals to, kind of follow those guidelines for spacing and distance from the home, etc. It might be good to think about converting your wood chip mulch to an inorganic mulch like squeegee or pea gravel or any other kind of rock material. And of course, like we were just talking about, keeping up on the decks and wood fences if that's something you have. So we just need to change our perspective as we look at that. One thing I like to point out is that a well-maintained landscape, which is valuable for the purposes of fire mitigation, actually does increase social acceptance. If you are doing like a landscape conversion of turf to a xeriscape, a meadow, pollinator garden, we just need to be thoughtful about how we do that, and we can use maintenance and design to increase social acceptance. We can develop our pathways and our turf areas to serve as fire breaks. So if you do have like a flagstone path, if we keep vegetation, weeds from coming up between in the joints, etc. If we basically maintain that, it becomes a fire break. If we maintain and strategically locate our turf grass areas for functional use, we keep them watered, we keep them mowed, that becomes a fire break. And it also helps our neighbors appreciate that the landscape is maintained, it is cared for, and that those wild areas are intentional. If you do wish to have more wild areas, brush piles, leaf litter, etc., we just need to be thoughtful about their placement, that we don't make it easy for flame to get up into the larger shrubs and trees. And we can take some solace in the fact that we're not trying to fireproof our landscapes. We're just trying to moderate fire behavior to make our homes more defensible. And if we do have that zone 1 properly free of combustible materials, and if we are keeping our homes properly maintained, even if if there is a fire event, and if it's of a scale that each home can't be individually protected, a lot of these practices can help increase the odds of surviving such an event. So I'll leave it at that. I'll just point out that there is a lot of compatibility between xeriscape design and Firewise design, but there are some differences. If you are doing the Firewise design, by its very nature, it's going to be a low water landscape that's not going to require life support with a lot of water. But if we do consider the arrangement of plant materials in our hardscapes and selecting proper plant materials, we can have that added value, but also, as you saw in some of those demonstration garden photos, have a very functionally valuable, ecologically valuable landscape that's also aesthetically pleasing. So we're already transitioning our landscapes for water conservation. That's clearly moving in the proper direction, even if too slowly. And I think we can do the same at the same time for fire mitigation. So I think we have about 20 minutes or so for open questions and discussion. I will advance some slides here that I'll just leave on the screen while we're talking. So feel free to, did I see a hand raised a minute ago?
Mel, I don't get her last name. Mel Go Space?
Oh.
Goldsype, that's me.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just wondering, like, obviously each house is going to be different, whatever, but an approximate cost for having someone come in to do an evaluation, and then
Yeah.
an approximate cost for how much the work itself would be.
Okay.
Which I
The first
understand,
question-
it's going to be hugely variable. But like
Yeah.
I'm in a normal neighborhood with smallish plots, you know.
And are you in Larimer County?
Yeah, I'm just directions. Now I'm just west of Lake Loveland.
Okay. There is, let's see, do I have it on the current screen? If you look on the counties, well, there's a couple answers to your question. The county recently established something called the Wildfire Partner Program. It's 1, 2, 3, the fourth link on this slide. They have a program set up. Basically, they act as a clearinghouse, and they, based on your address, they identify which fire department, et cetera, could do this. They have a program that will offer free home assessments. So if you, it may take a while to, they basically do this as kind of an added service, and they can't always respond quickly at any given week or month. But that's a free option to get that assessment. I do them myself. It comes in different forms. I have developed what I call kind of like a quick assessment. What I do is it's like an hour-long site visit, walk around with the client, and instead of generating a report, there's a checklist in this document. This is a poster generated by firewise.org. It's loaded with information, but there is a checklist in here. And what I do in that hour visit is this becomes a product that's left with you. Check the boxes of things to focus on. It's already kind of pre-prioritized, and that's $100.
That's fantastic.
No, that is the asterisk there is, I can't I had someone in Denver ask me to do one for them, and it's like, well, I can do this for you for that price, but it needs to be when I'm in the area, right? Because I could spend 3 hours just driving. So if it's in Southeast Larimer, and if it's not a lot of travel time, that's the cost. For a larger property, rural property with multiple structures, and a report, that's probably more in like the $500 range to do that. The site visit is still like an hour or so, but there's a fair amount of time to generate a custom report. So there's a range of options depending on how quickly it needs to be done and how custom the report needs to be. That does cover everything that we talked about today, the defensible zones, but also home hardening as well. Does that answer your question? satisfactorily.
just like how much to actually have the
Oh,
work
I'm
done.
sorry. I forgot the second part of your question. So that is
We have
incredibly
to save
variable.
up, we need to know in advance.
Well, the good news is that you can accomplish a lot yourself at zero cost. Like, it doesn't cost anything to rake up leaves. It depends on your personal capabilities and interest in doing a lot of those kind of maintenance and tasks. Like I mentioned earlier, if you do have like wood fencing, wood, a wood deck, if you do want to take like an interim action to improve, I mean, the first thing to do is clear out that 5 feet around your deck and around your home. And that might just be the cost of disposal of your landscape waste. And if you have the capability of disposing of it at like the landfill or at the Loveland Recycle Center, I take multiple truckloads of vegetation to the recycle center every year, and each load is like $16 to $30. So it can be very affordable to do a fair number of these actions, but it does require a lot of labor. And so that depends whether it's something you can perform yourself or you have to hire someone. Obviously, contracting, I don't know. I would imagine there are some landscape contractors that can do some of these kind of things more on kind of a time and materials basis. But the larger projects, you probably would have to get bids from those contractors.
Just one
As
follow-up. Any
yeah,
suggestion on how to get your neighbors to agree to replace your fence?
well, collective action is important. These steps are obviously more effective if we do it, neighborhood wide. Our HOA, we applied for and received 2 grants from the County Office of Emergency Management that funded for the disposal of waste material. So there is a grant program that HOAs can apply for. I don't know if it's of its status this year, but they did issue grants the last 2 years. So that's a way to collectively fund waste disposal. In our case, that did include wood decks and other wood structures. We allowed them. It wasn't just vegetation. It was also lumber. When you have an issue of shared fencing with a neighbor, that largely depends on your relationship with that neighbor. If that party is agreeable, obviously there's cost savings and cost sharing when you do it together, and ideally with multiple neighbors doing it as a larger project. A landscape, a fencing contractor will give you a better price per linear foot if you can double, triple, quadruple the amount of fencing by kind of pooling resources with your neighbors. But it isn't, there's a social component here that that there is a learning curve to get others to appreciate that it is in their self-interest to take some of these actions. And that largely will depend on a lot of outreach and education. Depending on the situation, it might be something that, like if you contacted the county and they had a representative from the fire department come out, that might be an authority that that individual may be more receptive to hearing from. In other cases, there may be kind of an anti-authority, perspective, and it might take a different approach to be persuasive. And I should mention on the cost side, a lot of these issues, like a lot of these things can be very costly. we didn't talk like about a home siding. If you're going to convert a wood siding on a home to fiber cement siding, for example, that is, obviously an improvement from a fire resistant perspective, but it's also incredibly expensive. So a lot of these things are desirable to implement at the time that the siding needs to be replaced. Or like this past spring, we replaced the roof on the house. At that time, I had the roofing contractor install that stainless steel mesh called wildfire defense mesh. It's like super fine. It's made out of stainless steel, and they applied that to the opening where the ridge vent was before they put the ridge vent on. And so the marginal increase in cost was minimal because it was done at the time that the roof was stripped. But if you were to retroactively put screening in that particular application on, it could be, very cost prohibitive because you have to strip tiles, install the vent, and then put the ridge vent back on top. So a lot of these things are like when you do this checklist, you identify potential improvements, but the implementation of those improvements could be over a manner of years. And you might just strategically decide to do something when it's ready, when there's already a need to make a change. So for example, with a wood deck, if there's 5 years left on it, maybe you wait 5 years. And then when it's time to redeck it, that's when you convert it. Either just replacing the decking boards and adding the flashing on your joists, etc., or making a full conversion and starting with steel studs, etc.
Kevin, Andrea Long had another question.
I put it in the chat. It's about my piles of dead burned trees. They're not super close to the house. One of them is maybe a little closer than I like, but when I've tried to deal with this in the past, my contractors are like, we don't know how to deal with this. They were too big to chip, and they disintegrate when you try and pick them up and haul them away with heavy equipment.
Okay, so they're on the ground.
Yes.
So the good thing there is their wildfire risk is already substantially reduced. Kind of like wood chip materials, they burn, but they don't burn intensely, and they don't generate a lot of embers, assuming that you don't have 100-mile-an-hour winds.
Well,
if they're so fragile that they just disintegrate when you try to pick them up, I would consider that kind of a low priority. It seems like if they're are they not accessible by vehicle or trailer?
the whole property is challenging because there's nothing that's naturally flat.
Okay.
So this was part of the Reservoir Road fire in, what was that, 2012? Something. I was before I got here.
Okay. That was before too.
So previous property owners had done some clearing, and we did clearing before we built. And we did a bunch of chipping, but my logging contractor is like, these are too big, we can't deal with them. We're just going to make piles of them around the place. So now they're just like there.
So they were accessible, but they said it was too big to chip.
Right.
I mean, there are chippers that can take
I just need to find
24
somebody
inch.
else with a different chipper. But of course, now they've been on the ground now for over a decade.
Yeah. I would imagine at this time, it's just all kind of just disintegrating. It probably would be difficult to chip them at that point. They generally, tree contractors don't like to chip material that is rotted, contaminated with soil, etc. So at that point, it's almost like raking. I would imagine it sounds more like stuff you would collect in wheelbarrows or trailers and taking it to like the landfill or the recycle center for composting.
There is some smaller material that could be picked up and raked up. For example, what's left of some of the piles of chips. But a lot of the logs are quite large.
Okay, so there are still big chunks, big
Right.
logs. Well, if they are still, in log form, I know that there are trippers out there that can basically digest a 2-foot diameter tree
Okay,
trunk.
so my contractor at the time wasn't prepared to deal with it. That's pretty much what it sounds like.
Yeah, they probably had a smaller chipper for like 6 or 10-inch diameter, branches and stuff.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. A true tree contractor, an arborist, typically would have
different
equipment
equipment.
that can handle that kind of log.
Right. We did take some of them, and some that were capable of being easily moved, and we made several piles uphill for habitat.
Oh, good.
But that's far away from any of the structures. The ones that I'm concerned about are the ones that are downhill.
Okay. Yeah, if that is still, if they are still, I mean, there's different ways of looking at that. I'd have to look at it on site. I mean, the nice thing is that large logs are difficult to ignite. It's kind of like trying to put a large log, starting a large fire, a bonfire, but you're using huge logs. If there's not material around that can apply enough heat to that log, it just doesn't really do much.
All right. Yeah, this sounds like it would need a larger assessment of the situation because, of course, it's
Probably.
a large property.
Yeah, all these things are really site, specific, and it's also, the recommendations are very, it's not black or white. We have to kind of evaluate multiple objectives, and a lot of times, if you were to look at my property, you would see that I make exceptions to the rules. And a lot of homeowners are resistant to fire mitigation because they don't want to lose all their trees, right? And so you really have to evaluate individual trees on a property.
Yeah, this property lost all its trees 15 years ago. I've got one that's relatively near a structure.
Okay. Yeah, so we do, there are kind of, black and white recommendations, but those do need to be prioritized. And it may be in looking at your property that either it's a priority to remove those logs, or it may be, there are other actions that are much more important. As I mentioned earlier, the first priority is really managing that zone 1, that 5 feet around the house. Home hardening, and then the first 5 feet around the house. Those are the top priorities. And then as you move out, there's still actions that are valuable to take, but they tend to be lower in priority.
Okay, that's useful. I've done a lot with hardened construction.
Oh, good.
In the last minute, is there anybody else that has a question?
Okay, looks
Yes,
like not. I appreciate everyone's time and good questions. And I didn't cycle through. We'll save these if the recording's still going.
Yes,
This
and
is
Kevin, I told folks in the chat that when we send out a link for the video, we'll include a list of all the resources that they'll be able to click through.
Very good. Okay.
So, well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and thanks Kevin for the presentation. That was a whole lot of information. We're really grateful to you. So have a good night, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kevin.
Bye-bye, Fran. Thanks.